Well, here this past week and weekend, we saw rain, we saw snow, we see colder temperatures coming into much of the country here as we begin the final couple days of October and roll the calendar into November. Let's talk about what we're seeing on the weather front. Joining us now, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien Ag Solutions, back with us here this week. And Eric, great to catch up with you once again. And like I mentioned, everything from heavy snow in the northern plains to some heavy rainfall in some areas. Quite a wide array of precipitation that we saw here the last few days across parts of the country.
Yeah, I mean, well over a foot of snow, right? That extended from parts of Montana into North Dakota, and then we saw the second round on Saturday and Sunday coming out of Colorado, clipping parts of Nebraska and hitting Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota. All saw some snowflakes fall. And good news is, I mean, it's kind of funny to think about this, but there's all this cold air now, but all that snow will likely melt. And the snow that's out in the plains and in the Midwest will melt, and which means it's going to be contributing to our soil moisture. And I got to think about it from that perspective because you're right, that was the snow side of this, but the southern side of this, out of Texas into Oklahoma, parts of Kansas, Missouri, Illinois. I mean, we saw huge rainfall, and then yesterday it moved into parts of the Mid South and the Ohio Valley. I saw some places in Texas grab 10 inches of rainfall. And this all happened after the drought monitor was released on Thursday. So it'll be some major change in our US precipitation and soil moisture maps over the next few days here. And this is what we hope to see this fall. We needed this to bring the Mississippi up. I mean, it's now only 8.5 feet below low stage at Memphis, but hey, we were talking 10 days ago about it being 12 feet below low stage, and which means it's going in the right direction. And water's trickling into it from all of these heavy rainfall events. Who missed it though? The
Mhm.
Southeast. They got nothing. The Southwest got nothing out of this. The East Coast really missed out on a lot of this as well. And even though some snow came through the Canadian prairie, which they desperately need moisture as well, the bigger event was in Montana and North Dakota. So, yeah, what a wild week just this past few days here. But I'm glad to see this pattern start to shift itself around a bit. But last week was pretty exciting.
Well, and with this pattern shifting around a little bit, let's turn our attention to this week. And I think first, the temperature side of things. Eric, sounds like with this cold air coming through much of the country, a lot of frost and freeze potential is going to be out there to start off the week.
Yeah, we've got widespread freeze warnings that go all the way from, like El Paso, Texas, clear to the Appalachian Mountains. And those freeze warnings are pretty well warranted. It's kind of interesting to see this, but we started watching last time you and I talked. There was a weak little low that lived over the Arctic. Well, I mean, the Arctic, so just north of Siberia, on the other side of the planet. Well, it made its way through the Canadian archipelago. It went through Manitoba this weekend, and now it's a little clipper coming through parts of the Dakotas with winds maybe of 40 miles an hour today, blowing that snow around. And then it might add to 1 to 3 inches of snow in Minnesota, Wisconsin, clipping northern Illinois, hitting parts of Indiana and Michigan. Little Halloween clipper coming through here, but it's sending the temperatures, I mean, way down. We might get a frost as far south as I-10. I mean, that's where it might get down to. And down there, this is a big deal down that far south. And normally they don't get their first frost that far south for some places, not even until December.
Wow.
So yeah, it's some cold air coming through, but it's short-lived. Already by the middle of this week, the winds are going to shift back around. It'll be back up in the 60s on the front range of the Rockies, where we just had all that snow coming through. And the pattern's going to open back up to a bunch of flow out of the west. So welcome to the U.S. This is what we get here.
Well, and thinking about that, watching the frosted freezes, and you mentioned temperatures moderating here as we go through the week. So maybe a little bit of a milder start to the month of November. As you look out a couple of weeks, though, we're going to hold on to that mild pattern. Let's talk about that a little bit before we shift to South America.
No, I think what you're going to see in the month of November. Here's my statement for November. Okay,
Okay.
the thing that's controlling the pattern right now that made all this happen in late October, it's going to be there in November as well. We're still in week on, week off. We're about to go into a big long week off where the pattern's just boring and not a whole lot to talk about. But come mid-November, I think we're going to see things. When I say mid-November, I'm talking like after the 8th, 9th, and 10th. We're going to start to see things shift back around again. I think we have in the month of November at least three sizable systems coming across the country. It's starting right now in the West. They're going to
Mhm.
be wetter for a while, but I still think it's going to be a pretty good November in terms of developing systems that roll across the country. I can't tell you their timing just yet because they're out there beyond what we're thinking in terms of the models, but Still think it's going to be active. And by the way, Jesse, it's kind of crazy. Don't sleep on the Caribbean just yet. There were some indications over the weekend of something coming out of the Caribbean, and I can't rule it out as terms of a tropical system. And that's still 7 or 8 days from now, but I don't know. Something's down there. I got to keep an eye on it.
Definitely, we will keep our eyes on that. Well, let's go past the Caribbean. Let's go to South America and Brazil, Argentina. We've seen quite a few problems start to stack up in a very short amount of time. So,
Yeah.
what is the latest you're seeing in the Southern Hemisphere right now?
Yeah, well, maybe just before you get to the southern hemisphere, I do want to tell you better rains are forecast for Panama. Got to keep
Okay.
an eye on that. Now, let's get south of the equator. And we saw last week, okay, maybe last 10 days, some pretty serious heat build into Brazil. And I saw it and I said, okay, it's going to get hot. But is it that uncharacteristic to see temps deep into the 90s, maybe touching 100? It's early, but I wasn't alarmed because there had been some rain and the planting progress numbers were so high. When that heat came in, farmers said, nope, done. I am not going to plant into this. This is poor germination. We saw what had been a pretty good pace drop off now below the 5 year average pace.
Hmm.
And going forward, I don't exactly see the most widespread rain, which means you may have farmers waiting another week before they go back and aggressively plant what needs to get replanted and to finish what's going to get planted. Southern Brazil, the flooding story is still going. I mean, we've got incredibly heavy rains forecast for Paraná, Santa Catarina, Sao Paulo, Paraguay, Northern Rio Grande do Sul. Those are the same states I've told you for weeks have been dealing with flooding rains. So they're down there, and the southern part of Brazil not getting much done either. Now, while the heat is gone, Argentinian drought is still a problem. You may have seen some of the
Yeah.
news reports of some big storms that hit parts of like Cordoba, Buenos Aires, even in Santa Fe this past weekend. It was kind of like Midwestern storms are in spring. You got some guys that just got nailed, and they're all like, "Let's go! Okay, we got the moisture." And then you got a lot of folks that missed it. I think that's going to continue to be an issue in Argentina. So I checked the weather gauges in Cordoba, big producing area. I have to think of Cordoba as like exactly where I live in central Illinois. And they missed out on almost all of that rainfall. So we need to see better moisture down there for the store to improve. So my tune has kind of changed in the last 10 days about South America. I was sitting
Hmm.
there going, all right, I think there's some potential issue, but it hasn't reared up. And all of a sudden in the last week to 10 days, it's there. And we'll see how markets react to it this week.
Yeah, we'll see how markets react to it. And I think as well, just as the issues start to stack up in South America, they can move quickly, they can plant quickly, they can make up time, but it just shifts that timeline back even more. So then we start worried about that safrita crop and more. So once you start kind of moving their timeline a few days, few weeks, that could kind of perpetuate upon itself here for months to come, right, Eric?
Yeah, it can. And I think the other thing to watch is that, and you and I mentioned this last couple of weeks, the Amazon's really dry. It's really
Yeah.
low. And the Amazon, remember, to get moisture into the main north central growing areas, the flow has to come through the Amazon first. It kind of curls around. And if you have a dry Amazon, the Amazon's going to steal the moisture first. Now, if it steals half of it and it's January, nobody cares because you can get half a normal rainfall in northern Brazil in January and get plenty. But stealing it early in October, stealing it in November, that's no good. That's something we got to watch out for. And then we also wonder when the monsoon begins to slow down. Does it slow down early because of these problems, which
Mhm.
pressures the safrinha crop? So, I don't want to say it as all of a sudden, but here we are talking about a reversal in our kind of
Yeah.
tune we were singing about South America, or at least I was singing about it.
Eric, before we let you go real quick, anything final you want to share with us? Anything else you're watching on the weather front this week?
Oh yeah, there's always tons of things. Europe's pretty stormy this next week. I'm keeping an eye on how much snow covers in Siberia. Australia's a bit drier. Indonesia's quite dry. I really want to know when are we going to be able to start talking about winter pattern setup? Like when am I get to talk about the Bering Sea or the Chukchi Sea or Arctic oscillation changes north? Those all those things are still ahead of us, man. So right now it's the Pacific, and I'm going to keep an eye on it.
Well, folks can as well find your weekly newsletter and daily information available at ag-wx.com. That's ag-wx.com. Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Thanks so much for joining us this week. Have a great one. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good.